For more on the jobs report from July, we're joined from Weston, Connecticut with Peter Schiff. He's the CEO and Chief Global Strategist at Euro Pacific Capital, and also Mark Hamrick. He's here in the studio with me. He's the Washington Bureau Chief at Bankrate.com. Thank you very much, gentlemen, both for being here on Biz Asia America. Mark, let me start with you. 162,000 jobs created. It was a little bit lower than expectations, but the unemployment rate did dip down to 7.4%. How should we read this?
It is a report which was clearly disappointing, but it certainly wasn't a disaster either. We've been sort of conditioned to these reports where job growth has been modest. The Federal Reserve described the economy's growth as modest just this week. This was another report telling us about modest jobs growth.
So we got a modest job growth. Peter, by the way, good to see you again. Let me ask you this. The work week shrank and hourly earnings fell for the first time. Explain to us what that means. I mean, it sounds like bad news, is it?
Well, it is bad news. One of the reasons that the report is actually worse than the headline is because about 2/3 of the jobs that we created are part-time, low-paying service sector jobs. That's the problem. In fact, so far in 2013, I think better than 3/4 of the jobs we created are temporary or part-time, low-paying service sector jobs. We need to create real productive jobs, but unfortunately, we are not doing that in this economy. In fact, I think the labor force is shrinking because the U.S. economy is actually shrinking. I think the GDP numbers we got a couple of days ago are ultimately going to be revised down close to zero. And if we had a more accurate measure of inflation, we would see that we are currently in a recession in the United States, and it's going to get worse. And so, unfortunately, the Fed's not going to taper. They are going to increase the size of QE. And I don't think I'm being a pessimist. I think I'm just being a realist, because I think the reality is it's pretty bleak in the U.S. economy.
Mark, retailers added 46,000 jobs. It confirms what Peter is talking about, that yes, a lot of these new jobs are being created in the sort of lower wage service sector jobs. But isn't that better than no jobs at all?
Well, sure. Traditionally, however, retail, leisure, and hospitality are not the jobs that you write home to tell your parents that you landed, right? So we'd like to see, exactly as Peter says, we'd like to see more business and professional jobs. We'd like to see more full-time jobs. There has been a constant criticism lately that too many of these jobs are part-time. It's also worth mentioning, it's not unusual to have a large pickup in part-time employment before you have full-time jobs being added, and we need to wait and see what happens with that.
Gentlemen, I don't want to compare ourselves to Europe, but in Europe they talk about the youth unemployment. They talk a lot about those who are working part-time jobs, but they really want full-time jobs. And here in the U.S., we obviously have a different case, but there is something that is similar, and that is if the workforce is shrinking and people who want to work aren't working, why is that? I mean, it's hard for a lot of people to understand how that can be, Peter.
Well, first of all, the government makes it very lucrative for a substantial part of the population not to work. If you see the disability, the food stamps use, these things are surging. So a lot of people are living off the government. But also part of the problem is we have a lot of, we have the minimum wage law, we have all sorts of other taxes and regulations that increase the cost of hiring lower skilled people, and that disproportionately hurts the young. And of course, a lot of our young people now who are graduating with these kind of worthless liberal arts degrees with a pile of debt. Another reason they don't want to work is they don't want to have to start paying back their student loans.
All right, I want to be very careful here because there are people with me who are probably in my ear with liberal arts degrees, Peter. But I want to ask you this. Talk about the minimum wage increase. There's been a lot of discussion about it locally in different cities. Ultimately, is an increase in minimum wage, is that good or bad for job creation?
Well, it's horrible. I mean, they should abolish the minimum wage. You know, Singapore doesn't have a minimum wage at all, and they hardly have any unemployment. You know, what happens when you have a minimum wage is that you make it illegal for lower skilled people to work, and because they can't get their first job, they can't climb their way up the job ladder to get their second and their third job. And so the higher you make the minimum wage, the more people you permanently trap in unemployment and poverty.
All right, Peter, let me bring Mark back into this picture. You're a veteran here in Washington. Congress is getting ready for their vacation, and let's be honest, they haven't probably done as much as a lot of people had hoped. And a big part of it is the stimulus and the job creation and stimulating local governments. Peter brings up a good point. It's fine that you get people into the workforce.